Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here on Depictions Media Radio, and of course I'm your host, Michael Clocks. In this next segment, what we're going to hear is about the war on drugs. Well, there may be some absurdities to the idea of the word war on drugs, and we're going to hear from that, hear about that from two other podcasters, Clayton English and Greg Glod. And they are starting a podcast on their own, and it's called The War on Drugs. And it'll be launching January 25th, but we get some insights about what is going to happen in that very first episode and in this series right here on this show. As we're going to have them on the show to talk about the war on drugs, real world consequences, and how this whole thing, how the war on drugs came about, and what kind of effects it's really actually having on today's society, and how the police are handling the whole thing and how the whole thing is developing out. So let's get started and let's listen to what Clayton English and Greg Glod actually had to say about the war on drugs. So let's welcome Greg and Clayton to the show, and you guys are starting from my notes here. You guys are starting a pretty awesome podcast with Lava for Good, and it's called The War on Drugs. So how did you guys get started on that? What's the story behind that?
You want to start us off, Greg?
Yeah, I can do that. I can tell this origin story. So yeah, I work at an organization called Stand Together. I am the advisor to them on criminal justice and drug reform. So really what I do is work on policy, working in criminal justice at the federal and state level. And so I have been working with Lava for Good and Jason Flom, who's the founder of Lava for Good, on a few things. He does a lot of great work on wrongful convictions and exonerations. And so a lot of our work coincided. And, I brought up the idea to him that, I think the drug war is one of the kind of large scale wrongful convictions that we have in this country. I think that'd be a great topic for a podcast to add to the many podcasts that they do over there at Lava for Good. And so we started collaborating on this, and then we came about Clayton's stand-up comedy and saw that he did a lot of humor and touched on a lot of aspects about, his personal life and upbringing, dealing with cops, dealing with the drug war on his own. And so kind of having these personal experiences and bringing those into his hilarious comedy set. Strongly recommend you all see Clayton English when he's out on the road. He's fantastic. Really just had a good time when I got to see him. And we thought we would be a perfect combination where I'm kind of the policy dork and Clayton comes in with a lot of the mirth and humor and entertainment and that real life experience. And so bringing it from both sides is kind of where we're coming from. Clayton, did I miss anything there or yeah?
No. I'm always glad that you brought up the idea of the podcast and it was able to find me in the midst of that. So that's awesome, man. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, comedy and real life experience. What's the real life experience part?
I mean, I'm from the South, so I've been pulled over by the police more times than I can count. I've seen the difference in, as a traveling comedian on the road, you kind of get used to what's going to happen. And I would get pulled over on my way to shows, and I would just talk about it on stage and talk about just the hypocrisies and how people get treated. And I would see these things, and then I'd actually talk to people because I'm in front of people talking. So after the show, sometimes I'm talking to police officers and they're telling me what the real experience is, how sometimes other officers are excited. And that's a lot of times why it's 3 cars. They didn't necessarily call 3 cars, but it's 2 other officers who were looking for something to do that pull up on a scene, and it just elevates a situation. So I think my real life experience just comes from, being arrested, which I'm not proud of, but I think it's all too common for people in my community to be arrested for minor offenses such as, marijuana and stuff that, in other areas people might be able to get away with, or the police aren't just actively looking for that. So
right. Well, you brought up something. You said something really interesting there. I found myself in volunteering inside of the Maricopa County, the county jail, right? Which is essentially tent city. They got everybody sitting in these tents in the middle of the desert, and you hear people talk about these men. They're talking about being in jail. Oh, I can do that time standing on my head, and they're proud of the fact that they can get locked up and they can survive being locked up, and that shouldn't be something we should be proud of, right?
No, it's more of I think. There's people who kind of celebrate it, and maybe that's what it takes once you're inside of there, just to you got to make a switch in your mind, and maybe that's what people say. But I think for the most part, nobody is really looking for that or wants that harassment or anything. Nobody is. It's not a badge of honor, and I hate that it's come to that, and it's all too common for us. So I think it's just something oh yeah, that's it's nothing.
Yeah, it's not something to be proud of. So, ultimately, what is the goal of broadcasting and building this podcast, the war on drugs?
Yeah. So I can come in here. Really, what we want to do is kind of take you on a journey and show that even if you're not arrested, even if you're not in the criminal justice system, even if you don't have a substance abuse problem or substance use problem or anything like that, or don't have a family member, the war on drugs does impact you, regardless of what your use is. And so we really like to take it kind of on a journey. And so Clayton's on a Marvel show. Why can't I think of the name right now? Hawkeye. Gosh, I was going to say Jayhawk. I just was thinking about college basketball. I was just watching over the weekend. So I was like, I know it's not Jayhawk. Yeah, but anyway,
hey man, get them DraftKings bets out your head, man. I don't know.
I know. Yeah. But yeah, this is kind of the origin story and how far back the war on drugs goes. A lot of us think about Nixon declaring a war on drugs, but it goes back decades prior to that. So really kind of building up there and showing the origins of the drug war and how it really started with this gentleman, Harry Anslinger, who was kind of the founder of the modern day DEA. And really what happened was after Prohibition, they had these agents and all this money, and there was nothing for them to do. And so how do you continue to maintain that type of funding in Prohibition? You start bringing in other enemies. And that enemy was a lot of Black Americans using marijuana or opiates. And so they started telling, tales about this guy in Florida killed his whole family after taking one hit of a joint, and really starting to build up this fear and this propaganda, very similar to other wars, as you have to kind of build that fear about your enemy, and enemies or drug users. So kind of taking through decades in time and those history aspects, but then also getting into areas that you don't necessarily think about coming from the drug war aspects that really touches on a lot of our lives. I mean, we had a amazing conversation with Maya Salvitz, who does a lot of work in addiction and substance use, at the community level. And she was talking about how after the opioid epidemic and how that's ongoing, a lot of prescribers were very fearful of giving out opiates for fear that they could be potentially prosecuted. And what we're seeing is cancer patients aren't getting opiates when they're going through debilitating pain, or people that have gone through horrible car accidents, because if they prescribe over a certain amount, then they potentially could be prosecuted. And so people are getting denied these pain treatments. And so if you get in a car accident or you get cancer or something like that, the drug war is going to impact you because of our prohibition tactics that we've done with opiates and things like that. And we get into PTSD and how psychedelics could potentially be a cure for that. It really touches on a lot of different areas about how if you have mental health issues, if you know someone who's going through pain, or you potentially find yourself in that, it really impacts all of our lives when we don't even know about it. And so I work in this policy, and I learned so much going through it, even though this is my job.
That's my I just wanted to add to that, the two things that are probably my favorite thing about this podcast is the information that's provided and how it answers a lot of questions that just casual people have about the war on drugs. And the other thing I love about it is the lenses that we're able to look at this war on drugs through our guests, and you're able to see it. And not saying that it's necessarily going to change your mind, but you're given the option to, with all this information and how things actually work, you're allowed to decide, okay, is this really working? Like, and I think that's an awesome thing, man, because so many questions that just people, say, well, they're drug addicts, they should be, like, we throw away so many people. And I think this is showing that these are still human beings. And They actually have stories. They actually moms, their dads, their brothers, their sisters, they're somebody's husband, they're somebody's wife. So I think kind of giving that a face and not just some generic, criminal goon that they, just paint people to be on the news and things like that on the media outlets. So
Well, one of the things that I like that you brought up the pain therapy one. As I mentioned, I had volunteered that time in the Maricopa County Jail. One of the guys that they had arrested, and he had to sit there in jail until his trial came up and everything, because he was on pain medication. He was on Oxycontin, and he made the mistake of walking down the street without the whole pill bottle. He just took a couple in his pocket with him because he was going to visit somebody, and he got arrested because he had this in his pocket. But the thing is he had a valid prescription for it, but they weren't going to actually look to see that valid prescription. They weren't going to put him in front of a judge until he'd spent several weeks in a jail over pain medication. With legitimate pain medication.
And that's so crazy, because doing the podcast, I think we learned, Greg, that the police have access to your medical records, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. They have these opioid treatment lists. And so that's another thing. If you're prescribed these, in a lot of places, some states have better laws than others, but in a lot of places they have pretty much unfettered access to these types of, controlled substance lists of things that are, legal with a valid prescription. It's very, very, feels like we kind of know about HIPAA a little bit and think that these types of things will protect us, but they don't. And so to your point, Michael, they could have easily checked that this was something that was a valid prescription. They could have gone through that process. And as you know, volunteering in the Maricopa County Jail, which is one of the most, I've been there as well, one of the most harshest jails in the United States. That entire Maricopa County criminal justice system is pretty rough, and so you definitely see the ins and outs of it and the worst of it. How much of an impact that has on a person's life. Even spending 24 hours in jail, that could have damaging impacts and really kind of slide you down a way of getting caught up in the cycle of the criminal justice system. You potentially lose your job if you are have children that you get picked up, or if you're dealing with custody. About all these things get kind of wrapped up just for one tiny thing, and our criminal justice system really doesn't do a great job of allowing for that type of empathy and understanding to just kind of speak this out. And the collateral consequences of something like that, I'm sure were very bad for that gentleman. Yeah.
Oh man, you lose your job. Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's all it takes is one day.
Yeah, it could be just one day, and you have a pissed off boss, and poof, there's your job, right? And there's your house. There's
Come on, domino.
it's a domino, right? Yeah. So one of the things that I always thought about the war on drugs, because I live in a beach community, and I have seen the police standing there with binoculars watching people drop the stuff off in the water. Because to be more descriptive, the beach community is between the U.S. and Canada, and on the West Coast, and they watch these guys. They drop things into the water, and they watch them little dinghies go out there, pull the stuff back ashore, and you see the cops standing there looking at him. It's like, so what are you going to do about that stuff that's coming in? And he shrugs. It's like, I said, you can do a lot more than just stand there and watch it, because that really is the bad guys. And the guy that may be walking around with a couple pills in his pocket on the street,
come on,
he may be self-medicating. There may be a whole long grocery list of things, the reason why he is an addict, but we're arresting him like he's the criminal who brought the stuff into the country.
Right, exactly. And that's something that we talk about on the podcast quite a bit, is that, a lot of the policing and law enforcement that goes about the drug war kind of targets the lowest common denominator a lot of the times, because those are the ones that you're able to get quick arrests on, quick convictions, likely not going to be represented by, a high-powered attorney. Normally these are public defenders. And so that's why you see a vast majority of the policing going on generally, in larger inner city. And that's what's going to happen. You see that, regardless of race, actually white people probably use drugs at the highest percentage of any race, or it's about even. But the vast majority of individuals that get, caught up in the criminal justice system for, a drug offense are Hispanic or Black. And because, a lot of the policing going on in inner cities where that's a higher proportion of the population. So, I grew up in a suburb that was vastly, the vast majority is white. My dad was a cop. We didn't have a lot of cops coming around and doing frisks on us and things like that. You're probably not going to find a lot of things on that side, because there's homes and things like that. But it's easy if you're seeing people on a corner, they have a little bit of pills or something like that, like you said, you can do a frisk, and then that's a quick, arrest. And you start to see, well, why are they doing this? What's the advantage? What's the incentive? You see that a lot of grant funding is tied to how many arrests that you make along this. You see that promotions, this is how we do this, getting, as a prosecutor, getting the most amount of convictions. That's a great way to be promoted. If you're a cop, getting these types of arrests, it makes your boss look good. And so it's all these little things that kind of come together to create this drug war and these perverse incentives that we have in it. And that's something that you really find, it's funny, we talk about, like, it's follow the money, follow the incentives. Why are they doing this? It's just like any other job. They're human beings doing what they can do to kind of, get ahead in life. And, that's why you're not seeing folks going out, out in the harbor over there, or, in the water trying to do these dives, because those are large scale criminal, operations that may not come back with a conviction. But I know I can go down the corner over here and grab 3 or 4, and that's going to really look good on my paper and workbook. So, you find that out quite a bit, and that's something that comes up each and every time these episodes.
Yeah. And the other thing we kind of learned too is a lot of times those police departments can do a lot more with the money than they can with the drugs. So it's almost in their benefit to catch the criminal after they've sold the drugs, because then they could just take the money and, between civil asset forfeiture and, like you said, the incentives that have been provided to them. It's one of those things where, we follow the money, and, things start to make sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I get to follow the money part, but what if the money leads to some billionaire?
Yeah. Hey.
Are we going to get a conviction on him?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, sometimes, these things, that's kind of the idea sometimes is to try to help flip people up the food chain. But kind of what you see is the system is intended to convict kind of the lowest common
Yeah.
denominators. And rarely are you finding out that, managers and higher level kingpins are actually getting incarcerated. In fact, they're able to kind of work the system in a way that allows them to, reduce their sentences or, get off completely scot free. Actually, we talked to an individual, Edwin Rubis, who's in Georgia, Alabama right now, incarcerated for a marijuana offense.
Oh,
He had sold or trafficked some marijuana for two drug dealers after he was trying to pay off, a debt to them that he owed because of his own addiction. 2 years later, after he was clean, three FBI agents came into his house and searched him. They found nothing, but based upon the testimony of people higher up in that food chain, they were able to nab them. So a lot of the times, the people that don't have the information, the lowest people on the totem pole, are the ones that actually take the brunt for a lot of these things because of
yeah.
the way the laws are set up. So we have these laws called conspiracy laws, where you actually don't need to find any drugs, but if someone's able to testify against you and say that guy knew about 9 kilos, even though he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, they're able to pinpoint that without actually having any drugs in them. So yeah, absolutely. We're able to get kingpins and managers and all these higher level people sometimes by flipping folks, but a lot of the times it actually works the other way where it goes top down because of the way the laws are written. And so that's a huge problem. And you're really only nabbing the people that are generally, doing this because of financial issue or their own addiction. And once
Yeah.
they get into the system, as you know, Michael, working at the Maricopa County Jail, a lot of the times they're not getting the best treatment or help. I think 70 to 80%, I know this in Arizona, in their prisons have a severe substance use issue. And I think there's only about 11% of people that are ever able
Yeah.
to get into treatment while they're incarcerated. And so that's a huge issue as well, that once we actually have them in the system, we're not really working on those underlying circumstances. So yeah, it's absolutely that you're able to flip people sometimes, but generally that's not what we see. It almost goes the other way.
Yeah. Because I know the mass media, the last really big, because I know we have what's called the RICO Act, right? And
Right.
the last really big publicized RICO conviction that I remember was Gotti, and it actually it not only did, okay, they got the guy in jail, but it turned him into some sort of a celebrity. So how does that
Yeah.
help our society if we're trying to, one, help people get over their addiction or their mental health issues, or what have you, and how does it help us find justice?
Yeah, absolutely, and you see that time and time again. I mean, we saw with El Chapo. He's kind of
Yeah.
lives in myth, and
Yeah.
going back to Scarface. I know as a kid, I was watching that movie, and you start to like memorialize these things. In Mexico, we learned we had an episode with Sam Quinones, who has an amazing book called the Least of Us that talks about the opioid epidemic and the fentanyl epidemic, and in these communities in Sinaloa and Chihuahua and Mexico, they write songs and they have these drug lord ballads, and these are the people that are actually lauded in a lot of these communities. And yeah, it's a huge problem because a lot of folks, this is how they see that this is the way to get out. Almost like how we, laud on, oh, I want to be Michael Jordan when I grow up. I want to be the next, big singer. In a lot of communities where there's a lack of hope, drug dealers are actually the celebrities, and they make these T-shirts and all these things. And so, yeah, no, it does not help society
Yeah.
at all. And that's really a big driver in a lot of these places, that how much they look up to these folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
like you said, in Mexico, I think they call them the narco corrido.
Yeah, that's right.
Is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
songs that they make
Oh,
like tribute these drug dealers,
Yeah.
man.
The
Like,
whole genre. Yeah.
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 But also, it could be the cartel dudes at gunpoint saying, "You better make this song about me." So
Well,
it may not be that they really like them like that, but you
well,
gonna make that song.
Yeah. Hey, I play guitar, and trust me, somebody puts a gun in my head and says, "Write a song about me." I'm playing.
Yeah.
You want that to be flat or like, yeah, what's
Yeah, exactly, right.
And a 1 and a 2.
Yeah. You do that kind of stuff on stage?
Oh man, this is all I do, man. Yeah, man.
Yeah. So, I love comedy, and I can see how you just kind of weave the story right in there.
Yeah.
So, well, okay. So you're also Greg. You're also part lobbyist, right?
Yeah, I do some lobbying and advocacy work at the state and federal level. So a lot of that is
Yeah.
education and talking with lawmakers and going across the country and talking on criminal justice policy generally, but also more specifically and much more focused on the drug policy and how that potentially impacts public safety and other things, our current laws and how they go. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you actually being heard on Capitol Hill with any current bills or anything like that? Is there anything that's going to help correct some of this?
Yeah, we're really starting to see, a lot of change in the way of thinking about how, our current laws and prohibition on drugs has really impacted things and has been really a net negative. How the war on drugs has really not brought, we're seeing opioid overdoses, hit record highs each year. Drug arrests continue to rise. It's still the largest drug possession, is still the largest, category of arrests that we have in the United States. And so we're seeing so much money bandwidth. And if you're thinking that winning the drug war would mean less drugs, we're seeing more drugs come in and more people dying. And so obviously it's been a failed policy, and people are really starting to understand that. You see public sentiment about marijuana legalization just continue to rise year after year, and more states, even conservative states, are really starting to turn that way. A great example is in Oklahoma. Just a few years back, they dropped simple drug possession from a felony to misdemeanor, and that was from a vote. During the general election during that time in 2016. So these are actual things
Right.
going on, not only in liberal places but in Republican places. One of the big bills that's trying to deschedule marijuana, essentially remove it from the books at the federal level, is being introduced by Nancy Mace, who is an incredibly conservative lawmaker from the Charleston area in South Carolina. And so you are seeing not only a better consensus from kind of the public, but also lawmakers that are coming from deep red places actually driving on a lot of this stuff alongside their Democratic counterparts that have been pushing a lot of this for a long time. And so we are starting to see headway on this. Absolutely. And so like I said, that law's there. Just recently, we're recording this in mid-January. You saw the Department of Justice say that we're going to start treating crack cocaine offenses the same way that we do with cocaine. One of the things that we saw kind of when the drug war was proliferating in the late 80s, you may remember the name Len Bias, who was a famous NBA, famous college basketball player that died of a cocaine overdose. Based upon his death, essentially, they moved laws to create these mandatory minimums and say crack needs to be treated at 100-to-1 level compared to powder cocaine, even though they're the same substance other than just baking soda, as essentially the only difference. But the 100 times the amount of cocaine it would have to take to trigger the same laws, the same sentences as crack. And we started to see that slowly change. And now the Department of Justice announced that they're essentially going to treat these things the exact same and remove that disparate impact on crack cocaine as compared to powder cocaine. So we are seeing things starting to happen. It's been a slow process, but even with all the negative and downside and kind of the despair that we see with the opioid epidemic, there is some, glimmers of hope coming that, we're really treating this much more like a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue.
Okay, so let me ask you guys this on the idea of treating it like it's a health issue. If we decriminalize, say, somebody gets caught with a crack pipe and whatever, just enough for personal use of crack or marijuana or cocaine or whatever other substances are out there, because we also have that poisoning thing with the fentanyl, right, out there. So you get caught with just enough of that. If they were to decriminalize it so that down to a person gets caught with the personal use, and we help them find treatment because we remove stigmas and things like that, people step up and go to rehab. And wouldn't that be a more effective tool on the war on drugs than having the police going out there and rounding people up off the streets?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and obviously every case is different, and things like that. But obviously, the way that we normally handle these cases, where I'll just give a general example where someone is found, with possession of drugs or something else, or they're dealing a low level amount of them. They may go in the system their first time. They'll get probation or some sort of something, and then they get caught again. And then they kind of just continue to go through this cycle. And then now they're considered this kind of career criminal. And they start getting these hardened sentences and these lengthy sentences when we actually haven't really started to treat the underlying conditions that they're going through, why they're committing crimes or trying to do this. A lot of the times, most crimes, even when it's not, just carrying drugs, if it's a petty theft or a robbery or something like that, is because they're trying to fuel their addiction and pay for these types of things. And so you see this kind of, downward spiral of an individual trying to use, almost committing other crimes to, maintain their own fix. Instead of actually trying to treat the underlying issues of it. And so in places that we've seen where they kind of treat this like a health issue, a great example is in Switzerland, where they actually, in a medical setting, give, heroin addicts actual heroin and help them move through that. And instead of, robbing or stealing or selling drugs on the outside, they're actually starting to look for jobs. They're starting to try to work themselves. And what they've seen is crime starts to drop and people actually stop using less and less until they don't use at all. And so instead of, someone getting locked up, thrown in jail, losing their job, losing their home, potentially now losing, custody of their kids and all these collateral consequences that happen with kind of our, blunt force of just arrest, jail, going through the system, actually treating these people like human beings, treating their addiction as a much more, positive and cost effective mechanism rather than, locking someone up and throwing them in jail and seeing them kind of bounce back and forth between the outside and the inside.
So, I was going to try to make a joke out of the black guy running down the street, and of course they searching for drugs, right? But that's not really all that funny.
That's
really
that's just truthful.
Yeah, Clayton, I've had it happen to me too. So, you don't look like you belong in this neighborhood. Well, let me search you for drugs, right?
Yeah.
So,
the only time I've ever been told I don't belong in this neighborhood is them trying to escort me out of a place to say like, "Oh, sir, so I apologize for bothering you. Let's get you out of here." Yeah, I don't think I've ever been really escorted out of places with force.
Right.
Probably, yeah. Funny how that happens. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
You got escorted by a security detail. Like,
yeah, exactly.
We gotta get him. Make sure nobody hurts him.
Get the motorcade out. Yeah.
But a lot of I think a lot of people in our society, they think that the second you add a little tanness to the skin or something like that, they figure that he's got to be. The police had a right to arrest him because he was a criminal, and I had to kind of grow up hearing this. That is like this guy committed like these really horrible murders or something like that, and he was up on drugs and everything, and it came down to if he was disturbed or if he was a criminal, depending on how the police were able to profile him. And we know the police profile and government's profile by skin color.
Right.
What do we do about that within the legal system?
I'll let Greg handle it because he's got these things, on tap usually. But I think one thing is if we start with the decriminalization of some of these drugs, that kind of takes away their reason for being able to harass people, because I think so many people are just getting pulled over because of the smell of marijuana. Like the states that have done away with that, it can even the playing field a little bit. And I think that's just a fraction of the start of what needs to happen. But I think, I'll let Greg take it.
Well, it starts at a good place, right? That's the whole thing. Starts are a good place.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and with coming in with decriminalization and legalization, it's obviously going to be dependent on the drug. I think a lot of the times, you use those words and people start thinking like, oh, what is there going to be like heroin and vending machines and things like that and the collateral consequences? And no, I think there's obviously drugs that, like marijuana that we found through, kind of the limited research that we're able to do because of its, because it's on controlled substance list, you're limited in what type of research you can do to show that there are health benefits. There are things to do, but if we do this in a controlled environment, a regulatory environment, that we could probably have illegal market. And then you get into harder, drugs and say, probably we shouldn't have, cocaine vending machines and store shops and things like that. But trying to help treat people with that and not use the criminal justice system as the only mechanism. Because like you said, a lot of the times the arrests, the convictions and sentences are being, disparately impacting on minority communities. And a lot of times because they are going in the inner city and that's where they're making the arrests. And so, we see this system that kind of, definitely impacts certain communities more than others. And we're seeing kind of the generational downfall where a child doesn't have their father or their mother in their lives anymore because they keep going in and out of jail instead of rather treating them for addiction and things like that. And obviously the generational impact that's going to have. And so, a lot of the things that we see where, a kid, I live in DC and carjackings have been a huge issue with kids as young as, 12, 13. And a lot of these times you see like, dad was in jail for, cocaine addiction or heroin addiction, or they lost their life, or they were going out and out of jail. And you see this generational cycle of crime that happens. And I think a lot of this was if we treated this like a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue, and allowed for more diversion, allowed for more treatment, invest in these types of things rather than jails and prisons, we'd have a lot better results and we'd have a lot safer communities and a lot more people, thriving rather than, really struggling right now as we've seen this opioid epidemic and other things that continue to rise and impact communities all across the country.
Yeah. And that's the other thing, the opioid epidemic kind of like we saw that it's made addiction more human for people out there in the suburbs. It's given it a face. Now they know somebody who's actually addicted. They can see themselves in that situation. So there's a little bit more compassion, and hopefully that has an impact. It's a shame how it had to come, but hopefully that shifts things in a better direction when people see it actually affecting people that, look like them. And it's not just something that's, in the inner city and these people,
Yeah. Well, see, that's the important thing, that you have different areas saying, well, it's those people. They're the problem, instead of looking at their own neighborhoods, because I grew up in an upper class suburban setting, and there was, I don't know how many cocaine parties and stuff like that. Granted, we're going back into the 1980s and stuff like that, where it's like, but these people had the money to be able to dust a house with cocaine and everybody in it, be able to just breathe, and there it was,
Right.
So, but if we shed more light on addiction, more people should come forward, though, right, and say, hey, I have a problem and I need to get off of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see this kind of stigma around addiction and kind of the fear of admitting those types of things because of the potential consequences that can come of it through the criminal justice system. So exactly to your point, removing that stigma, kind of removing these rigid parameters that we put about through the drug war, on addiction and what this actually is and what actually is effective at bringing people together. I think even, the folks that would call themselves tough on crime and things like that, they want safer communities. And so do the people on the other side that kind of see the drug war as a failed experiment that we're looking at. We all want the same thing. It's just, how do we handle this? And I really do understand people that say, these people are out on the street, they're robbing, stealing, like we have to do something about this. And there's a personal responsibility aspect of it. But what you really see with the drug war, it kind of removes that personal responsibility from it. Like you said, Michael, these folks are saying, like, I can just do my time and I'm done with it. What's really hard is to go into treatment and actually change yourself. And just going into jail, doing 30 days and moving through, that's nothing. I used to be an attorney. I talk to clients all the time. It's like, hey, we could put you on 2-3 years probation, do drug treatment, take you to drug court, do all these things. Or the other option is 30 days in county. They're like, yeah, I'll just do the 30 days. I'm not doing any of that. Screw it. So it's that type of thing that actually kind of removes some of that responsibility from it, the way that we handle things. And a lot of it's just churn. public defenders have hundreds of cases. They're overworked. Prosecutors are overworked. Cops are overworked. There's not time in the way that we have this huge churn of people to come through and really do individualized, specialized things to help them out, because we're just arresting so many people. I mean, we had 11 million arrests in 2019. And that dropped a little bit because of COVID. That is a lot of arrests. That's paperwork. That's time. That's effort for really minor
things.
That's a
lot of arrests when everything was closed.
Yes, I mean, that's what we're talking about. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so, yeah, and so you just think about that time and energy and effort that goes into just booking one person on a simple drug possession rather than kind of like moving them through into other things. And so, try to.
And we're not even talking about drugs in jail. So that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, that was something else. There was a drug overdose when I was doing that volunteer work. There was a drug overdose in the tent city, where the guy managed to, we're going to say, quote unquote, smuggle OxyContin into the camp, and he took it. He OD'd, and they just kind of swept the whole problem under the rug there. They never did try to figure out how he got it in, or if it was smuggled in by one of the guards.
Yeah,
which is also possible too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, very telling on that. It was, drugs were still getting into jails and prisons when visitation was completely ceased during COVID, and so.
Right.
How else is that happening? And so, it's a huge issue. I think we think like, people are just going to dry out when they go to prison and jail. And for some people, it does help them kind of, remove from some of that place. But a lot of times people go in there with a minor substance use issues and come out worse. I mean, they really learn how to be a better criminal when they go into jail and prison, and actually are able to get drugs a lot easier while they're in there. And so that's the major problem. A lot of the times when we actually have these folks incarcerated, we're not correcting the underlying causes of their criminogenic behavior, and we're just warehousing them and making them worse off. And they come back out and they know, they have 3 more connections because they met this guy that they were cellmates with, and now they're doing higher things. And we see this cycle kind of continue, and our criminal justice system actually exacerbates a lot of these issues rather than helps them. And so we really need to start again thinking about this as a health issue rather than a criminal justice system, because obviously what we're doing right now is not working. And that's what the podcast really goes through, is how all these little areas of prohibition not only impact the criminal justice system, but the healthcare industry, the music industry, immigration, all these things are impacted by prohibition, the way that we handle these things over and over again. It's really fascinating to kind of see. Yeah.
So, okay. So the podcast launches January 25th.
Yep.
Yes.
That's in just a couple of days from now.
We're getting there.
What's the opening episode gonna sound like? What's it gonna feel like?
Yeah, so the first one is kind of going to be really a lot about the origin story that we were talking about a little bit before. We have an amazing guest on there, Johan Hari. He's a British author that has written a couple books on the war on drugs, particularly in America, and really goes through what we've missed on addiction and what we've missed on this history and origin of how the drug war has proliferated really on false pretenses. And he's just an amazing man and tells all these amazing stories. And we really get into a lot of the work that he did on Harry Anslinger, like we talked about earlier, like the founding father, the godfather of the war on drugs, and how he was just this guy who really proliferated this based upon, like I said, false pretenses and lies to really help kind of solidify his position within government. And again, it comes back to incentives. And so Johan's just fantastic. So we really build up, give you that solid foundation, and they get into a lot of different things in the following episodes that we go through. We talk about like we said, the Len Bias death with kind of the architect of a lot of the things and the authors. And so you get into a lot of different guests and hosts, and I think we don't want you to come out. We're not driving a certain opinion one way or the other. It's much more like kind of choose your own adventure, but we want to give you this information from the best experts that we know. We try to have a little fun doing it. It's not the lightest subject, but Clayton's friggin' hilarious, and then brings a little bit of levity sometimes here and there when you need it, because it's a heavy subject for sure.
And it's so informative, man. I just learned so much, and it was one of those things where you learn something and everything else that you already knew starts to make sense. You're like, oh, okay, this is what it is. So I hope a lot more people kind of have those little epiphanies throughout the episodes.
So the whole goal is education and more education.
Yep.
And hopefully we'll see some change out of that.
Absolutely.
I'm to be totally honest with you, I'm looking for it to come out on January 5th so I can download and listen. Greg, best of luck in trying to push the politicians into something. I know what that feels like because this is a political show and I get to talk to politicians all day long and they say one thing one time, then the next time I was like, oh, well, that happened and we weren't really able to whatever it was, right?
Right.
And Clayton, I hope to catch you on stage sometime. Let me know when you get up into the Northwest and
Definitely. If I'm in the area, I got tickets with your name on it.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. It's been fun, and I hope that the War on Drugs podcast is an absolute success. So yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
You and me both, man. Yeah. Hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael, so much. It's been great.
Appreciate it, Mike.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.